2 days had passed since Nira arrived in Nishigani. The morning sun was already climbing high when Miko slipped through the sliding doors of the Frontier Line station. Her black tail waved behind her as she moved with that familiar light, almost weightless step. Her sharp dark brown eyes scanned the room before landing on a large figure checking his saddlebags near the counter. She tilted her head slightly. "Brock," she called out, her voice carrying that usual playful lilt. "Have you seen Kane?" Brock turned around, adjusting the strap on his glove. He gave her a small nod of recognition. "Kane? Nah, he left yesterday morning heading east. Said he had a run toward the Central Valley. Why? You looking for him?" Miko let out a small, disappointed sigh, though the corners of her mouth were still curled in amusement. "Pity. I was hoping to catch him before he left." She walked closer, her cat-like ears twitching slightly. "That man is surprisingly difficult to pin down." Brock let out a deep chuckle. "You're telling me. We riders are always moving. You'll catch him eventually." Miko watched him for a moment as he finished preparing his gear. Then, as if remembering something, she reached into her cloak and pulled out a sealed metal cylinder, carefully wrapped and locked with a small dwarven mechanism. "The craftsman finally finished his work," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "He was quite insistent that this reaches Central City as quickly as possible. It's high priority." Brock eyed the cylinder, then looked back at Miko. "And you're bringing it to me instead of Nira?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Miko's smirk grew. "Nira just rode across the entire continent. She deserves a few days of rest. Besides..." Her brown eyes gleamed with mischief. "I thought you might enjoy a proper challenge." Brock stared at the package for a few seconds, clearly weighing his options. He thought about Nira, who was probably still sleeping after her long journey. Eventually, he let out a heavy sigh and took the cylinder, securing it carefully in his satchel. "Well, I guess I'm making the hard ride then." He finished tightening the straps on his horse, a strong chestnut stallion, and swung himself up into the saddle with ease. The horse shifted excitedly beneath him, ready to run. Just as he was about to spur the horse forward, Miko stepped closer and looked up at him with a big, knowing grin. "Oh, and one more thing," she said sweetly. "You should be careful out there. Bandits have been getting bolder in the Red Rock Badlands. Quite a few riders have reported trouble lately. Also, the Dark Elves have been unusually active. I don't know what they're planning, but I'd keep my eyes open if I were you." Brock looked down at her, his expression turning more serious. "Any idea why?" Miko simply shrugged, still smiling. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be telling you. I'd be telling the people who pay me." She gave him a playful wink. "Do me a favor, though. If you happen to run into Kane, tell him I said hello." Brock blinked, clearly confused by the request, but eventually gave her a single nod. "Yeah, sure. I'll let him know." "Safe riding, big guy," Miko said, stepping back with a final wave. "Try not to get shot." Brock gave her one last look, then clicked his tongue. His horse surged forward, hooves clattering against the stone street. Brock rode out of Nishiganen's eastern gate with the sealed dwarven cylinder secured safely in his saddlebag. The moment he cleared the city walls, the landscape opened up into a sea of shimmering silver and gold. The high-grass prairie stretched before him, the tall Suzuki grass swaying gracefully in the wind like waves on an ocean. Sunlight danced across the feathery plumes, making the entire plain sparkle. It was a far cry from the wild, flower-filled prairies of the eastern route. This land felt refined, almost elegant. He kept his horse at a steady pace, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. In the distance, he could see farmers tending to rice paddies, their conical hats with cat ears visible among the fields. A few travelers on foot moved along the road, some carrying large bundles, others leading ox carts. By late afternoon, the elegant stone walls and black-tiled roofs of Tenchu Fort came into view. The Nichigain-style fort stood proudly against the prairie backdrop, its curved eaves and red lanterns, giving it an almost peaceful appearance. Brock rode through the gates and handed his horse off to the stable hands. After a hot meal of grilled fish and rice, he found a quiet spot on the upper veranda. The Suzuki grass glowed under the setting sun, stretching all the way back toward Nishigani. He leaned against the wooden railing, thinking about the package in his bag and Miko's warning. Bandits in the Badlands, active dark elves. Neither sounded good. Brock let out a low sigh, rolling his shoulders. "Guess it's never a quiet ride," he muttered to himself. He stayed there until the sky turned deep orange, then headed inside to get some rest. Tomorrow would be a long day through the Blackthorn wilds, and he wanted to be ready. Brock left Tenchu Fort at dawn on a fresh horse, a strong, dapple-gray mare. The morning air was crisp as he crossed the last stretch of prairie and entered the Blackthorn wilds. The moment the dense canopy of spruce and fir closed over him, the temperature dropped. The forest felt heavier than usual. Even the birds seemed quieter. He had been riding for nearly 2 hours when the feeling hit him, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Brock slowed his horse to a stop, his hand resting near his revolver. "I know you're there," he called out, his deep voice echoing between the trees. "Show yourself." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped out from behind a thick fir tree about 20 paces away. He was a dark elf scout, lean and tall, dressed in dark leathers that blended perfectly with the forest. A curved bow was slung across his back, but he hadn't drawn it. His silver eyes studied Brock with cold intensity. "You ride with one of ours," the dark elf said, his voice low and sharp. "The one called Raven, the one with silver hair. Is she still alive?" Brock narrowed his eyes, surprised by the question. He kept his hand close to his gun but didn't draw. "She's alive," he answered carefully. "Why do you want to know?" The dark elf's expression didn't change. "Times are changing in the Blackthorn. Old wounds are being reopened." Without another word, the dark elf melted back into the trees, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. Brock remained still for a long moment, staring at the spot where the elf had stood. The message felt heavy. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew it wasn't good. He clicked his tongue and urged his horse forward, now riding with even greater caution. By late afternoon, he finally reached Shadowgate Fort. As he rode into the courtyard, a familiar voice called out to him. "Well, if it isn't the big man himself." Brock looked over and saw Kane leaning against a wooden post, a big grin on his face and a mug of ale in his hand. The catfolk looked surprisingly relaxed for someone who had been riding the same dangerous routes. "Kane," Brock said with a tired but genuine smile as he dismounted, "didn't expect to see you here." "Same here," Kane replied, walking over. "I was supposed to hand off my mail at the last station, but the rider was delayed. Figured I'd spend the night here and head out in the morning." They clasped forearms in greeting. Brock handed his horse off to a stable hand and stretched his broad shoulders, cracking his neck. The two of them found a quiet spot near the fire in the main hall. After Brock got some food and a mug of ale, he remembered Miko's message. "Oh, by the way," he said casually between bites, "I ran into Miko back in Nichigain. She told me to say hi if I saw you." Kane's ears perked straight up. His brown eyes sharpened with sudden interest. "She did?" he asked, leaning forward a little too quickly. "What exactly did she say?" Brock shrugged, completely oblivious to Kane's reaction. "Just tell him I said hello or something like that. She seemed in a good mood." Kane's tail flicked rapidly behind him. He tried and failed to look casual. "Did she say anything else?" Brock took another big bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully. "Nope, just that. Why? You two got something going on?" Kane's ears flattened slightly as he looked away, trying to hide the faint flush. "No, nothing like that," he muttered. "She's just helpful sometimes." Brock raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. He was too dense to catch the obvious. "Whatever you say," he grunted, going back to his food. Kane stared into his mug for a moment, a small, private smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he remembered the kiss on the cheek. The night passed with easy conversation between the two riders, but as they prepared to sleep, both of them felt the weight of the road ahead. Tomorrow, Brock would ride into the Red Rock Badlands, and something told him the journey was about to get a lot more dangerous. The next morning at Shadowgate Fort was cold and misty. Brock and Kane sat together at a long wooden table near the hearth, both nursing mugs of strong black coffee. The fire crackled softly while the rest of the fort slowly woke up. Brock took a long sip, his massive hands wrapped around the mug. "Guess this is where we split," he said. "I've got to push hard for Central City. That package can't wait." Kane nodded, ears twitching. He stared into his coffee a moment longer than necessary. "I'm heading back toward Nichigain," he said quietly. "No urgent mail, so I figured I'd check in at the office there." Brock raised an eyebrow but didn't think much of it. "Smart. Better than sitting around here." He grinned. "Tell Miko I said hi if you see her." Kane's ears shot straight up. His tail flicked once before he forced it still. "Yeah, will do." They clasped forearms, then went their separate ways. Brock watched his friend disappear westward with a small, puzzled shake of his head before mounting his fresh horse and riding east. The blackthorn wilds felt heavier than usual in the early morning mist. Brock rode with one hand near his revolver, eyes scanning every shadow. The dark elf scout's words kept echoing in his mind. Old wounds are being reopened. By late morning, the trees finally thinned. Brock emerged into the jagged red expanse of the Badlands. Towering mesas and narrow canyons stretched out under a pale, merciless sky. The heat hit him like a forge door opening. He kept his horse at a ground-eating canter, jaw set. The sealed dwarven cylinder rode heavy in his saddlebag, a constant reminder of why he couldn't slow down. The canyon narrowed. Red rock walls rose on both sides like the jaws of a trap. A faint metallic glint high on the left rim was the only warning. Brock yanked the reins hard. His horse slid sideways as the first rifle shot cracked through the canyon. The bullet slammed into the rock where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. "Ambush!" he roared. More shots exploded from above and ahead. At least 7 bandits. Black hats, red bandanas, long dusters flapping like vultures' wings. Some fired from the rims, others blocked the trail ahead, trying to box him in. Brock kicked his horse into a full gallop, leaning low as bullets zipped past his ears. The canyon echoed with thunder. He drew his heavy revolver and returned fire, the big gun booming like cannon fire. One bandit on the rim screamed and tumbled down the slope in a cloud of red dust. Brock didn't slow. He used every trick he knew, ducking behind outcrops, forcing the attackers to reposition. A bullet raked across his left upper arm, tearing through cloth and opening a deep graze. Hot blood soaked his sleeve, but he only growled and kept shooting. When the trail narrowed dangerously, he slid off his horse mid-gallop, slapping the mare's rump to send her ahead while he took cover behind a massive boulder. Bullets pinged all around him. He reloaded with bloody, steady hands. "Come on, you bastards, I've got people waiting for me back home." He popped up, fired 3 rapid shots, and dropped another bandit who tried to flank him. But they were good. Coordinated. 3 of them had him nearly pinned now, laying down suppressing fire while the others closed in. The ground began to shake. At first, Brock thought it was more riders. Then the trembling grew heavier. Loose rocks tumbled from the walls. A deep guttural roar split the air. The bandits froze. From behind a towering mesa emerged the Cyclops, 15 feet of gray hide, muscle, and rage, a single glowing red eye burning with fury. The creature bellowed and hurled a boulder the size of a wagon. 2 bandits were smashed flat against the canyon wall in a sickening crunch of bone and stone. Pure chaos erupted. The surviving bandits panicked and scattered, screaming. One turned and sprinted straight toward Brock in blind terror, firing wildly. Brock put him down with a single steady shot. The last 2 fled deeper into the canyons as the Cyclops roared again and lumbered after them, each footstep shaking the earth. Brock didn't waste the opening. Blood streaming down his arm, he grabbed his horse, swung into the saddle, and rode hard through the passage the bandits had been blocking moments earlier. Distant roars and screams chased him as he pushed east, the dwarven cylinder still safe in his saddlebag. He had survived. But the Red Rock Badlands had just reminded him, in blood and thunder, exactly why they were feared. Blood streamed down Brock's left arm, hot and sticky, soaking the sleeve of his duster. Every jolt of the horse sent fresh fire through the grays, but he kept pushing east. The sealed dwarven cylinder bounced heavily in his saddlebag. Still safe. That was what mattered. The Badlands blurred past in a haze of red rock and dust. His wounded arm throbbed with every stride, but Brock Tanner didn't slow. He'd ridden worse. He'd survived worse. When the pain started to blur into a constant throb, he finally reined in just long enough to do something about it. He pulled the bright blue ribbon from his arm with his teeth. The fabric was already damp with sweat and dust. Without hesitation, he wrapped it tightly around the grays, using his good hand and teeth to knot it hard. Blood quickly stained the clean blue cloth crimson. Brock stared at it for a long second. The once vibrant symbol of everything they stood for now, dark red, almost black in the harsh sunlight. A low, rough chuckle escaped him. "Guess that's what the road does to freedom sometimes," he muttered. "Turns it red." He flexed his arm once, testing the makeshift bandage. It hurt like hell, but it would hold until Wyatt's Fort. Then he kicked his horse forward again. The sun was dipping low by the time the sturdy log walls of Wyatt's Fort rose ahead of him, silhouetted against the fiery sky of the Badlands. Lanterns were already being lit along the palisade. The sight of that blue banner flying from the watchtower hit him harder than usual tonight. He rode through the gates at a weary trot. A stable hand rushed out, eyes widening at the sight of the big rider covered in blood and dust. "Get the healer!" the man shouted. Brock swung down heavily, stiff from the hard ride. He steadied himself against the horse's flank for a moment, then unstrapped the dwarven cylinder and handed it off with a bloody hand. "High priority," he rasped. "Make sure it gets on the next eastbound rider." 2 men helped him inside the main hall. They sat him down hard on a bench near the fire. A middle-aged woman with steady hands, the fort's healer, immediately started cutting away his torn sleeve. Brock winced but kept talking. "Ran into some bandits. Then the damn Cyclops showed up. Took care of most of them for me." The healer shook her head, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. "Deep graze. Messy, but nothing important was hit. Keep tearing it open on horseback and I'll make you regret it." Brock glanced down at the blood-soaked blue ribbon still tied tight around his bicep. The color had gone almost completely red now. He gave a tired, crooked grin. "Yeah, lucky." As the healer worked, Brock leaned his head back against the rough log wall and closed his eyes. The pain was fading into exhaustion. His thoughts drifted. First to the package he'd delivered, then to the dark elf scout's warning, and finally, unbidden, to a certain graceful high elf with long blonde braids, who was probably still resting back in Nichigain. He wondered if she'd worry when she heard about this. The thought pulled a tired smile from him. Outside, the red sun finally slipped behind the mesas, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Inside Wyatt's Fort, the big man with the bloodied blue ribbon let out a long breath, and allowed himself for just a moment to rest. For tonight, Brock let himself rest. Tomorrow, the line would keep moving. While Brock rested at Wyatt's fort in the Red Rock Badlands, Cain Remy was pushing west under a far gentler sky. The high grass prairie west of Shadowgate Fort rolled like a golden sea in the late afternoon light. Cain kept his horse at a steady, sustainable canter, never pushing too hard, never taking unnecessary risks. That was how he rode. Careful, calculated. Except today his calculations kept failing. Every few minutes his mind drifted back to the same place, a pair of dark brown eyes, a mischievous flick of a tail, and the ghost of a quick kiss on his cheek outside a Nishigani stable. Miko. Cain's ears twitched beneath his hat. His tail, usually tucked neatly against his leg while riding, kept trying to curl with nervous energy. He forced it still. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to his horse. "I have a schedule. Supplies to check, reports to file. I shouldn't be detouring just because some chaotic cat girl told me to say hello." The horse snorted, as if disagreeing. Cain sighed and adjusted his grip on the reins. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. He wanted to see her. He had replayed that night at the Golden Reed Inn a dozen times. The way she'd teased him, the way she'd listened when he talked about logistics like it was the most interesting thing in the world, the way she'd flicked his ear and called him quiet boy, like it was an endearment. For once in his life, Cain Remy wasn't riding toward duty. He was riding toward something else. The thought made his cheeks warm. He pulled his scarf a little higher, pretending it was just the wind. As the sun began to dip, the elegant silhouette of Tenchu Fort appeared on its hill, red lanterns already glowing softly against the twilight. Cain rode through the gates with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally accepted he was making the right choice. He handed his horse off, delivered his modest mail satchel, and found a quiet corner in the rider's quarters to wash the trail dust from his face. While he was drying off, one of the fort keepers called out, "Remy, you heading back to Nishigani tonight?" Cain hesitated only a second. "Yes," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "I've got personal business at the office there." The keeper grinned knowingly but didn't press. "Safe ride, Blue Ribbon." Cain stepped back outside as full dark settled over the prairie. The stars were coming out, bright and countless. He mounted a fresh horse, a sure-footed roan named Slate, and turned west once more. The Suzuki grass glowed silver under moonlight. The wind carried the faint scent of night-blooming flowers. Cain rode in silence for a long while, letting the rhythm of hooves and the vastness of the land settle his racing thoughts. Halfway across the final stretch of prairie, he finally allowed himself a small, private smile. "I'm probably going to regret this," he whispered. Then softer, almost hopeful. "But I don't think I will." The lights of Nishigane appeared on the horizon like a promise. Warm paper lanterns and the distant ring of forges. Cain's ears perked forward. His tail curled with quiet excitement despite his best efforts to stay calm. Somewhere in that city was a certain mischievous cat girl who had told him she wanted to see him again, and for the first time in his careful, well-ordered life, Cain Remy was riding towards something that had nothing to do with schedules, supply lists, or logistics. He was riding toward her. The lights of Nishigane were already glowing warmly when Cain finally rode through the eastern gate. Paper lanterns swayed from shop eaves, and the distant ring of forges never truly slept in this city. It was well past sunset, probably 2 hours into the night watch, by his best guess. He guided Slate straight to the small Frontier Line stable, attached to the modest branch office near the east wall. The stable boy recognized the blue ribbon immediately and took the roan with a respectful nod. "Long ride, sir?" "Long enough," Cain muttered, ears twitching. He was dusty, tired, and trying very hard not to look as nervous as he felt. Inside the little office, the lantern was still burning. Kane dropped his saddlebags on the desk, pulled out the delivery log, and scanned the latest entries with practiced speed. Nothing urgent. A few routine contracts, some supply requests from Shadowgate Fort, nothing that couldn't wait until morning. He let out a slow breath, tail flicking once behind him. Personal business, he reminded himself. That's what I told Brock. He was just turning to head toward the Golden Reed Inn when the sliding door rattled open. A familiar black cloak swirled in with the night air, followed by the light, almost silent pad of paws. Dark brown eyes locked onto him instantly, sparkling with pure mischief. Well, 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 Miko purred, leaning against the doorframe like she'd been waiting there for hours. If it isn't my favorite quiet boy, you really did come back. Kane's ears shot straight up. His tail puffed out before he could stop it. Miko, he managed, voice cracking just slightly. How did you... I only just arrived. She tapped the side of her nose with one finger, grinning wide enough to show a hint of fang. Catfolk noses are very good, Kane Remy, especially when the person they're waiting for smells like trail dust, coffee, and that particular brand of nervous logistics energy you carry around. She pushed off the doorframe and sauntered closer, tail swaying lazily. Also, the stable boy owes me favors. He sent word the second you rode in. Kane opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. His face felt dangerously warm under his skin. I had some free time between assignments, he said, trying to sound professional and failing completely. Figured I should check on the Nishigani office, in person. Miko stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could smell faint traces of smoke, metal, and something sweet like rice wine on her breath. She looked up at him with those dark brown eyes, head tilted playfully. Check on the office, she repeated slowly, clearly not buying a single word. At this hour, after riding all the way from Shadowgate Fort. Kane's ears flattened. He scratched the back of his neck, tail curling tight against his leg. Yes. Miko's grin softened into something warmer, almost fond. She reached up and gently straightened the blue ribbon on his arm, fingers brushing his sleeve. You're adorable when you're bad at lying, she whispered, then louder with that familiar, teasing lilt. Come on, quiet boy. I already told the innkeeper to keep your usual room warm, and I saved you some soba from dinner. She hooked her arm through his without waiting for an answer and started tugging him toward the door. Kane let himself be pulled along, heart hammering harder than it had during any winter storm or bandit scare. As they stepped out into the lantern-lit streets of Nishigani, Miko glanced sideways at him, ears flicking happily. By the way, she added casually, you still owe me a proper date. Showing up covered in trail dust doesn't count. Kane's tail puffed again. A tiny, helpless smile finally broke through his flustered expression. I suppose I do. The two catfolk disappeared down the street together, one walking with confident, bouncing steps, the other trying, and mostly failing, to look like this was all part of a perfectly reasonable logistics plan. Kane glanced once at Miko beside him and stopped trying to justify the detour. Sunlight poured over the red mesas like molten copper. Brock sat on a bench outside the main hall, freshly bandaged, but already restless. His left arm throbbed under the clean wrappings, and the bloodied blue ribbon, now stiff and dark, had been carefully washed and laid out to dry beside him like a battle trophy. The healer had ordered him to rest at least 2 days. Brock was already tightening the cinch on a fresh chestnut stallion. You're an idiot, the healer muttered from the doorway, arms crossed. That graze needs time. Road doesn't wait, Brock grunted, swinging his saddle up one-handed. Package is delivered. I've got reports to make in Central City. Besides, he flashed a crooked grin, it's just a scratch. He was about to mount when the sound of approaching hooves made him pause. A familiar white duster and wide-brimmed hat appeared on the western trail. Nira Windrider rode in at a hard canter on a dapple gray mare, blonde braids swaying behind her. She had left Nishigane only a few hours after Brock. Miko had told her about the worsening bandit trouble and the high-priority package heading east, and Nira had made up the distance the only way a frontier line rider could, pushing hard, changing horses aggressively, and barely stopping at Tenchu and Shadowgate. Brock's ambush and overnight treatment had finally given her enough time to catch him. The moment she spotted him, her blue eyes sharpened with concern. She dismounted gracefully and crossed the courtyard in quick, purposeful strides. "Brock," she said, voice soft but tight. Her gaze dropped immediately to his bandaged arm and the blood-stained sleeve still visible beneath it. "Miko told me the Badlands were getting worse. I figured I'd catch you before you got through them." She reached out without thinking, gently touching the edge of the bandage. Her fingers lingered. Brock straightened up, trying to look as solid as ever despite the wince that slipped through. "It's nothing," he rumbled, voice a little gruffer than usual. "Few bandits tried their luck. Cyclops finished most of them. I'm fine." Nira's expression didn't change. She studied him the way she studied injured animals, calm, knowing, and unwilling to accept "fine" as an answer. "You've opened the bandage again," she said quietly, "and you're planning to ride all the way back to Central City today?" Brock scratched the back of his neck with his good hand, ears burning under her steady gaze. "Got responsibilities," he muttered. "Can't sit around here while the line keeps moving." Nira was quiet for a long moment. Then she gave a small, resigned sigh, the kind that somehow carried both exasperation and fondness. "At least let me ride with you," she said. "2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and I can change your bandages at the next station." Brock opened his mouth to protest, but the words died when he met her eyes. There was real worry there, hidden behind that graceful calm. He let out a heavy breath. "Yeah, all right." They left Wyatt's Fort an hour later, riding side by side under the wide Badlands sky. Brock rode the fresh chestnut stallion. Nira kept pace on her dapple gray. The washed, red-stained ribbon was tied around Brock's upper arm again. For the first few miles they rode in comfortable silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the wind across the red rock. Eventually Nira spoke, voice gentle. "You know I'm not letting you ride the rest of this alone." Brock glanced over at her. She was looking straight ahead, braids swaying in the breeze. "I figured that out back at the fort," he rumbled. "Good." Nira smiled, small, private, and warm, and nudged her mare a little closer so their stirrups nearly brushed. The 2 riders continued east together, one still stubbornly pretending he wasn't hurt and the other making sure he did not get the chance to prove it. The Central Valley welcomed them like an old friend. Golden fields of wheat and barley swayed gently under a warm afternoon sun, broken only by the slow turning of windmills and the occasional stone farmhouse with bright gardens spilling over low fences. After the brutal red rock and gunfire of the Badlands, the gentle landscape felt almost unreal, peaceful, safe, alive with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Brock rode the chestnut stallion, shoulders squared despite the dull throb in his left arm. Nira kept pace beside him on her dapple gray mare, her white duster bright against the golden fields. For the first hour they rode in comfortable silence. The only sounds were the steady hoofbeats, the whisper of wind through the wheat, and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Nira was the one who finally broke it. "You're favoring your left side," she said softly, without looking over. "And you've been gripping the reins tighter than necessary." Brock let out a low chuckle that turned into a wince. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I notice you," she replied simply. He glanced sideways at her. The late sunlight caught in her long blonde braids and made the edges of her blue eyes glow. For once, Brock had no quick answer. They reached a small, clear stream that wound through a grove of flowering fruit trees. Nira reined in her mare. "Stop," she said. It wasn't a request. Brock opened his mouth to argue, but the look she gave him, calm, patient, and completely immovable, made him sigh instead. He dismounted carefully, favoring his injured arm. Nira knelt by the stream, wetting a clean cloth from her saddlebag. When she turned back to him, Brock had already started unwrapping the bandage himself with his good hand and teeth. "Let me," she said, stepping close. He hesitated for half a second, then let his hands drop. Nira worked with gentle, practiced care. She cleaned the graze again, the cool water making him hiss through his teeth. Her fingers were light, but sure as she applied fresh salve and wrapped a new bandage. When she reached for the blood-stained blue ribbon lying on his saddle, Brock stopped her. "Leave it," he rumbled. "It's part of the story now." Nira looked up at him, understanding flickering in her eyes. She tied the red-stained ribbon back around his arm carefully. When she finished, her hand lingered for a moment against his bicep. "You don't always have to be unbreakable, Brock," she said quietly. "Not with me." Brock stared down at the top of her white cowboy hat, then at the ribbon. "I'll work on that," he muttered. Nira smiled, small, warm, and real, and stepped back. They mounted up again and continued riding east as the sun began its slow descent. The conversation came easier after that. Brock told her about the Dark Elf Scout's warning in the Blackthorn, the ambush in the canyon, the sudden roar of the Cyclops that turned the fight into chaos. Nira listened without interrupting, only asking quiet questions when he skipped over the painful parts. In return, she told him about her ride back from Nishigani, the peaceful prairie, the way the Suzuki grass looked like liquid silver under moonlight. By the time the walls of Central City rose on the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun, both of them were riding closer than they had been at the start of the day. Their stirrups brushed now and then. Neither pulled away. They rode through the main gates just as lanterns were being lit along the streets. The Frontier Line office was quiet when they arrived. Brock handed over the last of his reports and made sure the dwarven cylinder was logged as delivered. The night clerk's eyes widened at the sight of his bandaged arm, but Brock just waved it off. "Tell Wyatt I'll give him the full story tomorrow," he said. Outside, Nira was waiting with both horses. "One drink," she reminded him gently. "You still owe me for riding all this way." Brock looked at her for a long moment, at the white duster, the calm strength in her eyes, the blue ribbon on her arm that somehow always looked cleaner than his. "Yeah," he said, voice rough but warm. "I do." The Wyvern's Rest was lively but not rowdy when they stepped inside. Thrain Ironbelly Stonefist spotted them immediately from behind the bar. His thick beard, braided with iron rings, split into a massive grin. "By my grandfather's flaming beard!" the dwarf bellowed. "If it isn't the big ox himself, and the prettiest rider in the line, what in the nine hells happened to your arm, Tanner?" "Badlands happened," Brock grunted, sliding onto a stool at the quiet end of the bar. Nira took the seat beside him. Thrain took one look at the bloodied blue ribbon and shook his head. "Sit. I'll bring you the good stuff, and don't even think about paying tonight." He slammed down 2 tankards of dark ale, a plate of hot stew, fresh bread, and a small bowl of salve, just in case. Then, with surprising tact for such a loud dwarf, he left them mostly alone. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth. For a while, they simply ate in comfortable silence. Brock's appetite was returning, and the hot food helped push back the lingering pain. Eventually, Nira spoke, voice soft enough that only he could hear. "When Miko told me the Badlands were getting worse and you'd taken that package east, I rode as hard as I could. I didn't even wait for a proper assignment." Brock paused mid-bite, then set his spoon down. "Didn't have to do that," he said gruffly. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I wanted to." He stared into his tankard for a long moment. Then, in a low rumble that carried years of riding dangerous roads and never asking for help, "Having you ride with me today made the miles feel shorter." He gave her a sidelong look. "Didn't mind the company." Neera's hand found his on the bar, not quite holding, just resting there, warm and steady. "Good," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long time. The noise of the tavern faded into a distant hum. Thrain occasionally glanced over with a knowing little smirk, but wisely kept his mouth shut. When they finally stepped back out into the cool night air, the streets of Central City were quiet under the stars. They walked their horses toward the main stables side by side, boots crunching softly on the cobblestones. At the stable door, Brock stopped and looked down at Neera. "Thanks for riding with me," he said simply. Neera tilted her head up, the lantern light catching in her blue eyes. "Any time, Brock Tanner." For a heartbeat, neither moved. "Try to rest tomorrow," Neera said softly. "The line will still be here in the morning." Brock gave her a tired but genuine smile, the kind he rarely showed anyone. "Yeah, I might even listen this time." They led their horses inside. Neera's blue ribbon was still bright and clean. Brock's was stained dark red from the road. Tomorrow the frontier line would keep moving. Tonight the two of them finally slowed down together.
Hit the dirt when the sun beats down. At Brimlow ain't saying a word, just the click of steel waiting to be heard. Rays burning down from the sun, gleaming eyes and a six-shooter on my leg. Ready for fun. Leather creaks and the whole street stares. One hand hanging like it just don't care. Twitch of a finger, heel in the sand. Every fool who knows where I stand. No bells ringing, no preacher's prayer. Just red dust and gunpowder hanging in the air. One wrong move, one little sound. One man standing, one going down. Red dust and gunpowder in the air. They will start flying 'cause life ain't fair. Six guns roaring underneath the sun. Smoke from the barrels when the shooting's done. Red dust and gunpowder, feel that heat. High noon shadow leaving blood behind. Every scar is another mile, every grave got a name and a crooked smile. Sun goes down but the dust stays red. Some ride home and some stay dead. Tomorrow morning they'll sweep this street, but tonight the powder still smells sweet.